Hello, everyone, and welcome back to a new episode of the Winning in Professional Services podcast. My name is Matteo, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Scott Presimone. In today's episode, we are talking about the ROI of networking, business networking. For professional service firms, networking isn't really optional, and it's actually an essential activity for growth. And although most firms seems to be sort of struggling a little bit with the quantification of its value. So this is exactly what we are going to be talking about today. And actually, while preparing for this episode, I came across an interesting statistic from a study done by the Harvard Business Review, where it says that 95% of business professionals consider face-to-face meetings essential for long-term relationships and business success. However, only 20% of those people actually can measure the results of doing this type of activity. And so this is exactly what we're going to be talking about today. Scott, before we dive deeper into the topic, what do you think are the biggest misconceptions or the biggest misconception you see about measuring the ROI of networking?
Well, I think the biggest mistake that individuals make when it comes to networking is they think of the short-term ROI, meaning that they think, if I go to this event, how many leads will I get from this event? Or sometimes they might think, if I go to these 3 events this quarter, how many leads will I get from those 3 events cumulatively in that period? And so I think either of those cases, it's thinking far too short term. And the nature of networking is that we're really talking about building relationships, and it takes time to build relationships. If we're not just talking about the surface level stuff of how many business cards did you hand out, which we'll talk about later, I'm sure, then I think we're talking about forming friendships, forming relationships, forming, partnerships potentially. And that does not have an ROI in a period of a month or 2 months or 3 months. I think that we need to not be thinking of this like an ad where you say, I've run this ad and I've spent this amount of money on the ad, and then what result did I get or how many leads did I get as a result of that ad running? Networking is a completely different animal. It operates very differently. And if you treat it like an ad, then you're sure to see no results and then likely think you, quote, wasted time or wasted money, and you don't stick with it nearly long enough to see the results that will eventually come if you do it right. And of course, today I think we'll be talking about how to do networking right.
Yeah, I love it. The problem I see is that everyone who believes in something and say this is networking for today's episode recommends it the same way, right? It says people say it works and try it, but then whomever listens about this advice, they ask, so how does it deliver value exactly, right? But yeah, like you said, networking takes time. It's not an instant gratification activity. And I think sometimes, I don't know, in my sort of networking kind of experience, I've at times come across or done events or went to meet people and came out of a meeting where I felt that everything kind of clicked, and I came away with this type of like positive feeling about having found this random great contact. But I would also say that this is kind of not the norm. Generally, it's not like you go to an event and find that one incredible contact. Like you said, we're talking about human relationships, and they're not always this fast-burning type of thing. So it does take time. So yeah, in today's episode, we're talking about what are the actual benefits of networking and the ROI associated to this activity. So starting off, I would say generally, like you said, and in your answer, I would say the first thing that comes to mind is really about building your own reputation, but also building relationships and friendships. Before we start recording, you mentioned that networking might also feel a bit like the word networking itself doesn't maybe have a great a reputation associated to it. It almost feels like kind of like a bad word to say, networking, go out and do networking. But in reality, it's more about go out and be a normal human being with other human beings, right? And I feel like you and I kind of do this, have been doing this for many years. Also, between the two of us, like we do meet every week other than recording our podcast episode, which was the result of us having long conversations before even deciding to do a podcast together. So we do meet every week. We talk about our challenges in our businesses, and we do offer each other advice. And I think that's one good positive aspect of networking. You start with an acquaintance, and then that acquaintance turns into a friendship, and then from there you develop all kinds of partnerships. Potentially you could create a podcast together or even do business together. So I think there's lots of things that can evoke, that can turn into good things for your own business from that one sort of initial acquaintance that you make at events or at work or other places, right?
Yeah, absolutely, Matteo. I think that I will just double down on that point of networking kind of being an annoying word. I think as soon as you think of that term, it's, oh, do that thing for business development, or do that thing you have to do, or hand out those business cards. And I think all we're talking about here is, like you said, be a human being. I would say form relationships, make friendships, meet fellow business owners, provide value. That's what we're talking about. That's the real networking. I think networking has gotten kind of a bad definition. And I think people are thinking about it incorrectly because of what's associated with that term. I think that even things like LinkedIn can be a place to build your network. And in reality, I think a little bit more like what Facebook became. It became, oh, I've got 1,000 Facebook friends. And maybe on LinkedIn you have 10,000 connections, right? But then how many of those connections are actual people that you would invite over for dinner? How many of those Facebook friends are actually people that you even know anything about them beyond their profile photo, right? And so in this case, I think we need to go to the deeper definition of what is networking, and it's forming actual connections and friendships and providing value to people around you. And in response to providing value to those people around you, then they're going to want to provide value to you as well. But to actually have them want to do that for you, you're going to have to know them, like them, want to be around them, and they're going to have to feel the same way about you. And so how do you actually form those connections? You got to be out there. You got to shake hands. You got to talk to people. You got to learn about people. And that's what we're talking about with networking, is socializing, learning about people, making friendships. And I would say take away that dirty word of networking and what you associate with it today, because I think that's probably not the accurate way to do it, is those associations with that word as you might have them.
And you mentioned about LinkedIn specifically. I think probably nowadays it almost feels like as LinkedIn has been associated to the word or the activity of networking. But what we're really talking about in this episode is that networking is more like a real life activity, right? Not a digital type of activity. Although you could do that after you have met people in real life, you could sort of continue nurturing that relationship over, maybe LinkedIn, sharing content, or having like Zoom calls and whatnot. But really, I think the real value of networking comes from meeting people in real life, face to face, like you said, shake hands, having those human connections that are hardly. It's hard to replicate just the fact that you can actually feel emotions and being in front of somebody and discuss things in a real life scenario, so to speak. Another kind of benefit of networking, and I think this is a big one and something that probably goes unnoticed a little bit, is the fact that through networking, you are going to be able to access hidden opportunities that you wouldn't otherwise be able to access if you were not, just meeting people. And the idea is that you don't want to go out and meet people with a specific agenda or specifically to get access to these hidden, quote unquote, hidden opportunities. But those hidden opportunities will eventually come by. And the idea of these hidden opportunities really is that all the best opportunities are or seem to be shared person to person in back channels. And I think that if two people are equally qualified, then it goes to who you know, like, and trust, ideally. And a lot of time, even when the person you like is maybe less qualified, that opportunities might go to that person rather than somebody that you don't know personally, right? And I think this is a huge benefit that it's hard, like I said, to quantify. But once you actually come across these hidden opportunities, you need to be able to credit that opportunity to the networking that you have done. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, Scott.
Well, yeah, you can even think from a job perspective, right? So you can look and post a job because you actually know you need to fill a role, and then you publish it, and then someone applies to it, and that's a stranger effectively who's applying for that job, and then you have to assess their resume and see whether or not they fit it. Whereas I think when you're saying hidden opportunities, that would be the case of someone just expressing a pain, where you're at an event and they're expressing a pain to you. They probably aren't in the position to say, I'm going to open up a role for this, or I'm going to start finding and researching agencies to fill this gap. They're probably just venting. They're probably just talking about it. And if you can be there and be of value, if you're in the technology space, maybe someone has a technology problem and they're just venting about it. They're maybe not at that stage where they're saying, now I'm going to conduct comprehensive research on this. And so if you can catch them there and just be that resource that's giving them useful information or pointing them in the right direction, then you're essentially identifying the opportunity before the opportunity even exists, in a way, right? You're creating that opportunity out of that pain that someone's having and sharing with you. So I couldn't agree more that the access to hidden opportunities, the way that you're going to do that is by talking to people and hearing them share their pains or struggles or challenges or ideas with you. And guess what? They're not going to schedule, we were talking about virtual versus non-virtual. They're not going to book a Zoom call with you, right? To spitball and vent a little bit. It's very unlikely. But if they are at an event and picking up some drinks or whatever at the bar and talking a little bit, right? That's where they're going to share that stuff. It's not appointment worthy. And so that's where, again, you're going to get the early access. And sorry, one other thing I think about here is that another benefit of networking is to have your ear to the ground. Because just as I'm saying, sometimes that might be opportunities. Sometimes that might just be you're talking to 10 different people at an event, and you're hearing kind of what people are thinking at that time, what's on their mind at that time. You might be able to identify what's going on through the subconscious of people in the local society or on a certain subject matter. And that, again, is going to be helpful. Even if it's not a business opportunity to you directly, it's going to give you knowledge you wouldn't otherwise have. And so you have to have your ear to the ground as a business owner or leader. And you have to think about ways to do that. And I would say do it in an organic way where people are going to be natural, have their guard down a little bit, and be more open to sharing. And that's what happens at events that we're referring to.
I love it, yes. This actually leads me to another potential benefit of networking, and it's really the idea of giving advice and getting advice. We all like to give friends advice and sometimes even ask for it. And there's definitely things that I think Google or maybe ChatGPT nowadays cannot really tell you. We rely on our networks to advise us and keep us on track. And we give back to our network in return. So just like giving a lot, you give a lot and you sort of get credit for the advice you give, and then you can then, after giving, get advice back from the network. that you have built around you. I think this idea is also quite powerful, just being able to rely on people that have experience and then, offer your own personal opinion on, subjects or matters that are important to them, and then eventually you'll be able to do the same if you ever come across situations where you need to get advice on things that you are maybe struggling with. The idea with networking is that you're not going to pay for that advice. You're just going to sort of get it because you have been just, helpful to people before you actually ask them for advice yourself. So I think that's generally another sort of important aspect of being able to network and access to people's knowledge sort of on demand, quote unquote. And I just think that we all like to get help and give help, and the fact that you are in a social setting where people seem to be sharing similar values as you, that makes it a lot more accessible and easier overall.
Yeah, at the start of this, we were talking about how you can't get immediate results, and I think that taps into the reason behind this. It's that multiple touch points need to happen before you're likely to give advice or likely to have those deeper conversations. So if you go to one event, you might meet someone, and that vanity metric is, I met the person, I got their business card, now I know the founder of XYZ company. You know them, like you know their name, and you maybe have their email address, but that's not knowing them, right? But then you go to another event, and then they're not at that one, but you come to another event. Oh, I think I met you at that one event last year. Is that right? Oh, yeah. What's going on? What's new? Right? And that's just the start of when you maybe start to form a relationship. I'd say by meeting 2 or 3 is where you're maybe starting to get a little deeper. And more often, some of the events that I go to, it's a year and a half later, and now people actually know, oh, I'm someone who's sticking around. I'm someone who's still going to that chamber event or still going to that, Rotary Club or whatever it may be. And I'm not now a nomad just passing through. I'm someone who's actually sticking around. And that's when I begin, to get taken a little more seriously. That's when people are now willing to invest a bit more time in a deeper conversation with me that they maybe otherwise wouldn't be willing to do. So I think that, as you said, it's sort of this multiplier effect or this compound effect where you're touching the surface, then you're getting a little bit deeper, then a little bit deeper. And sometimes you have to say 6 to 18 months later is when you're actually starting to form those friendships and those relationships and those deeper connections.
Yes. And this is actually maybe this leads us to our next section of this episode. I do hear at times entrepreneurs, business owners, business leaders saying, should I be doing networking, or should I invest my time and effort in, say, SEO or podcasting or other things? And I think the answer to that question isn't really about an either or, it's more about an and, right? You want to do this and that. Networking takes time just as much as it takes to rank a website in Google. And the byproduct of it is that you're going to get some rewards at some point in the future. Whereas, if you just get into doing this, new activity just because you need leads kind of today, it's not going to, actually, you're probably going to be a bad networker if you actually do that with that particular end in mind from the beginning. People are going to sort of, I think they'll probably sniff out that you're, just in for kind of the quick reward, or you're just going to try to get business out of them. It's not going to come across genuine. So I think, like you said, it's a very long-term type of activity, but I would almost argue it's kind of an activity where you have more control over than any other thing, because you are the actual person doing the activity. You're going to the event. You're not at the mercy of some type of algorithm. You're not just waiting for your website to rank. You're not just waiting for your videos to be seen or all these other things that you can definitely optimize for. But the networking effect is that you're just doing it, and then you can adjust pretty much in real time. You can kind of analyze your behavior, the way you speak to people, and then just adjust that for the next time that you go to another event, or even during the same event. You can even do this type of reflections in real time. So I think networking that does have it is a long-term activity, but it's also one of those activities in my mind that feels like you have probably more control over the success of it. Would you agree with that, Scott?
Oh yeah, and to your point about you learn from it, you could even learn in the one event that you go to, a conversation you have with one person. Then if that didn't go very well, then applying an adjustment before you talk to someone else. I'll share just a couple things that I tend to learn from networking events. One thing is that people are going to naturally ask you, "What do you do?" And I just recently brought someone new to networking events. I was encouraging him to network, and I was explaining to him how to do it. And the advice that I gave to him was, number one, have an answer behind when someone says, "What do you do?" Make it interesting. And I'm referring to a Donald Miller, point where he'd talk about how at a cocktail party, you have to be able to describe what you do in an interesting way that is applicable to the person you're talking to. So if you say, "I'm an accountant," that's kind of stop the conversation right there. If you say, "Oh, I help people overcome this sort of challenge when they run into financial difficulties, and a lot of times they don't know where to begin. So I provide a lot of free information online and give them education in this area to help them overcome those hurdles," right? That's a very silly kind of example, but I'm just sharing how if you show what you do and how you help people, then if you can do that in 10 seconds or less, then you're winning, right? That's a good way to do it. And secondarily, I tend to use the how to win friends and influence people sort of playbook of saying, let them talk about themselves, not you. Because when they're asking, what do you do? I kind of like to do the pretty quick what I do in a somewhat entertaining or interesting way. And then I go right back to them. And they might ask me a follow-up, and I say, "Oh, yeah, what about this? What about you?" And I always turn it back on them, because the reality is they're trying to be polite, right? They're asking me what I do because they're trying to be polite. And so I would like them to eventually get interested. And usually what I find out is later in the conversation, we'll end up talking about something completely different. And then I'll be sharing some story or something that I did or something I'm doing with my kids or whatever it may be. And then what I find is they then are asking me questions that they actually want to know the answer to. "Oh, so how do you do this with your kids? How do you keep them away from tablets? How do you do it?" Right? And now they're actually coming back to me because they actually want to learn something from me, because maybe I shared some interesting insight and they want to dig deeper. I would much rather have people come to me actually wanting to know the answer of what I feel on something, as opposed to, "Scott, what do you do for work?" And then me going off on a spiel of what I do for work and then them politely nodding their head. That to me is not useful. And that's why I like to rush past that part of the conversation. If it's the surface level weather conversation, "What's your job title?" I say, let's get right past that as quickly as possible. Let's move on. And then later on, I can use that more inbound effect of sharing something entertaining so they actually do want to hear from me. And one other thing of the do's and don'ts that I'd recommend while I'm doing a little bit of a rapid fire here, but it's that don't follow up after a networking event with, "Hey, it was good meeting you. By the way, I offer XYZ services, and you can find out more from my PDF that I offer right here," and da-da-da-da-da. These LinkedIn follow-ups that are, "I met you at that place, I got your business card, now here's my pitch." I don't think that's any better than if you were to give your pitch directly at an event. Now, you need to show that you're offering something, of course, I get that. But please, for goodness sakes, don't meet someone, get their business card, and then give them a pitch, right? I mean, my recommendation, I'm curious if you have any recommendations here, Matteo, but it's to, after an event, you do want to have the business cards, whether it's a digital format or you have, a stack of them, and the people that are relevant to you, then you might want to go through, add a connection request, and then maybe send them a nice note. "Hey, it was great talking with you about this," or "I really enjoyed our conversation about that," or "Oh, it's really cool. What a small world. I didn't expect your kids to go to the same school as mine. That's very cool. I hope Jenny and Sally are enjoying their primary school," or whatever, right? Just, that's it. Like, leave it on that personal level of, I made a connection and that's interesting. And what it might happen is 2 or 3 weeks later, something comes up that you actually think would be useful to them. And then you go back to that LinkedIn conversation and say, "Oh, by the way, I thought you might like this because you told me you were interested in this type of software. I found one recently. You might like this." And that's, again, give, give, give. Personal level, friendship level, share, provide value. Don't be pitching your service and giving a link to your PDF or your brief about how you offer XYZ services. That to me is, I just want to instantly disconnect with that person. If it's a LinkedIn connection, I'm going to say, I want nothing to do with this. Curious of your thoughts though, Mateo. Have you experienced that sort of thing?
I do, yeah, I actually agree. And the only time where I would actually talk about my services is if somebody asks directly for them. Like, what do you do? What do you offer? And if that ever is the question, then of course, or maybe somebody just asks me to send them more info about what I do after the event, then that's when I do it. But like you say, I think, yes, I think during the event itself, you maybe want to strike a good balance between professional and maybe personal stories, right? Obviously, you don't want to make it all personal where you just talk about, your, weekend activities. So obviously, the goal of the networking event is to know people from, from a personal and professional kind of side. But then, yes, like when the event is over, connect with them, send them, whether it's LinkedIn or if you exchanged numbers, send them a WhatsApp or whatever it is. And like you said, just keep it casual, keep it human, I would say. No pitching at all. And I think actually the real value of this activity starts right after the event. I mean, of course, the event itself is when you get to meet somebody on a personal level. They get to know you. They feel you. You see if there's chemistry or not. I think during that event. But then after the event is when you actually start nurturing the relationship. And I think that's something that you need to learn and try to systemize a bit. Maybe build a little bit of a little system behind the post event. So whether you keep notes of each person that you meet during the event on a particular tab in your, CRM, or maybe you just keep, a running list of notes during the event. Every time you meet somebody, you jot down a few key points about that person specifically you've just spoken to, whether that's their personal life, their kids, or their business, what they like, what they don't like, what they're struggling with. I think those are all things that will help you later when, like you said, Scott, 2, 3, 4 weeks later, you come across an article, you come across a video, you come across a podcast episode that talks about a specific, thing that they were struggling with that somebody has figured out how to solve or something along those lines. You can share with them with context. Whereas, if you're just sending them things that you think might be useful to them because they might eventually get back to what you offer, it's not going to work as well, in my opinion. So just have some type of, system on how to approach the event. Go prepared. I think that's kind of the whole point of going to an event and make the most of it. And I think just making the most of it is probably taking notes right after the event or right after you've spoken to somebody before you jump into another pod, so to speak, within that networking event.
Yeah, absolutely, Mateo. And you just mentioned preparation, and I know you're focused a lot on what to do afterwards. I couldn't agree more. When things are fresh in your mind, that's where you want to, again, jot down those notes. Maybe it's on your phone, on the taxi ride home or whatever it is. Then make sure you're remembering some of those things. Oh yeah, I talked to this person about that. What I tend to do is I go back to my CRM and I get a photo of the person, because to me, I'm a very visual learner. I really do need to know those faces. And when I say, oh yeah, that's Jim, that's his face, that's his company, that's the things we talked about, I'm just getting them in there as quickly as I can. And actually, on the note of preparation, I can't claim to have some ROI behind this, but I do think it's helpful, is that I actually do put my face on my business card. I think people might not like to do that because they feel it's making it about them. But I don't know. To be honest with you, if I meet 20 people on an event, they're going to start to blur together for me, and I'm not going to remember who's who. And so I do believe that there's something valuable in saying, oh, I have a face next to my name. So when they see Scott, they see my face. And then when they get a LinkedIn connection, they kind of might recognize me a little, or be more likely to recognize me than if I didn't have that. And it's not about being full of myself or just focusing on myself. I just think it's handy. Like, I wish everyone's business card that I got had a face on it. Like, I wish that. That would be helpful to me. And so That's just something that I think cost an extra 3 cents from your business card printing shop. So I think it's worth it. Have a picture on your business card.
I like it. I think you're right. I think people tend, if you don't have a picture, and I probably am guilty of this too, you tend to remember people by just giving them some type of attribute. Oh, the tall guy, or oh, the blonde guy, but you don't really know their name or their faces too well. So you try to associate some type of feature to them, and I think photos are definitely helpful. One thing that I think could be also useful for our listeners is just selecting the events that you go to a little bit. So just make sure that the type of person that attends the event you want to attend as well kind of matches with what you're trying to get out of it. Obviously, like we said, it's not about going there with the intent of striking deals, but obviously if the long-term kind of result is that you eventually will find potential partnerships, joint ventures, or even just people that actually share the same values as you, make sure that you attend the events that you think similar people as you, or the ones that you actually feel like match those criteria are going to be there. So do some research. Obviously, you're not going to be able to find everything online. Sometimes it's a matter of going to an event once, feel kind of the vibe, the room, and see what type of people attend those events, and then you can always decide, I'm going to attend this event again in the future or not, and just kind of like try and learn as you go. But there are definitely certain events where it's a little bit more obvious. You'll know what type of attendees are going to be there, and you're going to be able to select your events a little bit more strategically, which will allow you to just be more efficient overall with your networking activity.
Yeah, agreed. Something I would push back a bit on is that I totally agree that you have to be strategic about the events that you pick. That's a really great point, Matteo. I do think that in that calculation, though, there should be an overlap of the type of people that are attending the event and the type of events that you like. Like, let's say that there's an event that's a manufacturing event, and you're like, we target manufacturers, so I want to go to the manufacturers event. But then let's say that event is not very conducive to good conversations, and that event is not really managed well and whatever else, and you don't enjoy it at all. I think what's likely to happen is that if you're the founder, then you're going to stop going to those events because you say, it's so far away and it's a slog, and there's no good conversations to be had. And then you're going to say, I know, I'll get the business development guy to go off to those events instead of me, right? And so then you're very quickly getting into this outsourcing stage. And I'm a strong believer, and I want to get your opinion on this too, Matteo, but I believe that the owners and the founders need to be going to networking events, need to be going to events. And so don't just, again, think that you have to go to the events that are the perfect strategic decisions for you in one way, but you hate it so much that you're not going to do it, because then you're not winning, right? And so hopefully you actually can find events that you enjoy a bit. And I would argue that if it's an event that you enjoy that has a little bit less of your ideal target market type individuals at that event, I would double down on that. Go to the funner events that you like more, that may have some business connections there that might be useful to you in the future, because then you're more likely to keep doing it. And one other small thing I would say is, don't also underestimate hobby type events or events that aren't directly business related. And so an example of this would be, I'm a relatively new father. I have a couple young kids, and there are, I'm located around Bangkok, so Bangkok dads or fathers in Bangkok, whatever, are some of these events, and they're not business oriented. However, I would argue there's a higher chance in some cases of me meeting people at a Bangkok dads event where we're talking about our kids and stuff like this, and then, you work at Cisco, and you work at, right? You end up having these connections, and it's people that you're not focused on business, but later on they might turn into business relationships. But you're there because you're around like-minded people that you like and enjoy, and you're making friendships, and those friendships can turn into business friendships or business connections. So not every event has to be a business networking event. It can be a hiking event. It can be a bicycle riders event. It can be whatever else, and it can be a whiskey and cigars event, right? Whatever you enjoy doing, meet more people, do more things, get yourself out there more, and make sure that you don't just do it one time. Do it repeatedly. And to do it repeatedly, you're going to have to enjoy it. So build up that foundation of, and try to find your place, really, of things that you enjoy. Do you have any thoughts on that, Mateo?
I agree. I think you're totally right. It's you can find interesting people that may turn into business opportunities pretty much everywhere. You can go to restaurants and talk to the owner of the restaurant who might know somebody in another industry who might eventually at some point need the type of services that you offer. And you're never going to find that out if you never spoke to that restaurant owner in the first place, and you become friend with them and maybe go out for drinks with them or do some type of activity with them that doesn't relate it in any shape or form to business. And I think it's just really about, like we said at the beginning, building friendships, meeting people that you find interesting. And I think just by meeting the people that you actually, I think, find interesting, or the people that you want to, I kind of think that, you become the kind of the average of the people that you surround yourself with. And then, if you actually think about that as true, then, you'll find the people that you want yourself to become as. And so those people will eventually, get to build a business for you, or a network for you that will benefit your business eventually in the future, even if, directly you're not actually aiming for that. So I think it's totally fair. Just do what you think is, like you said, is fun, and you might find that going to this dad meetups or dog meetups or whatever other thing you're into might eventually benefit you in the long term as well. I think that's pretty much it for today's episode. We talked a lot about the benefits of networking. The most important ones, obviously, we've repeated over and over, is be human. People need people, so go out, meet people, make friends. From those friendships, you'll come across opportunities that otherwise you will not potentially come across ever. And just be helpful to people, give advice as much as you ask for it. And when you ask for advice, you'll be surprised by how much value you're gonna get from the network you've built over time. Just be helpful to people overall, and go into this activity as a non-negotiable, but like a long-term, never-ending sort of activity. And I think the fact that you're going to be doing this almost forever, it's not that you're just going to be doing it for, I don't know, maybe you have a business today that you're not going to have in 10 years' time, but maybe in 10 years' time you're going to have a different business. I think the network you've built 10 years ago is still going to be super valuable for any new venture you're going to get yourself into. So don't think about networks as limited to the business venture you're in today. I think the network that you're building is going to be kind of your net worth, and this is what a lot of people kind of refer to as your network is your net worth. So you really build it as something that is going to follow you throughout your career and beyond. With that, I think go out, have fun, meet people. Any other parting words for you, Scott?
I think you've covered it, Mateo. I think that it just comes down to, it's a non-negotiable. It's something you need to always be doing, and you can have fun while you're doing it. Don't do the stuff that's not fun. Do the stuff that you actually enjoy. Or if you don't enjoy it, I think the more you do it, you might enjoy it more, right? I mean, heck, go to the events that have the best food if you enjoy food, or that offer free drinks because you like drinks. I mean, just do whatever, but do not put it off and say, I'm not a social person, I'm an introvert, I don't like to network. It's like, if you want to grow your business then you have to form relationships, and to form relationships, you have to meet people. I mean, this is obvious, right? So no excuses. Go out there and meet people, have fun, enjoy yourself, and grow your network.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Scott. We are going to be publishing this episode on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and on our YouTube channel. And specifically, you can leave comments beneath the YouTube video of this episode. Feel free to let us know what you thought about it. And if you have any recommendations or suggestions for future episodes, feel free to let us know, and we'll be happy to cover those as well. Thank you so much, and see you next time.